This week, my exclusive interview with comic legend Tim Conway. He joined me to talk about his wonderful memoir, What's So Funny? My Hilarious Life. And later, syndicated columnist, advisor to 3 presidents, and the author of the new book, The Greatest Comeback, Patrick J. Buchanan. And finally, in our Unseen Hero segment, author Ron Suskind tells us about his son Owen's severe autism and how Disney films helped end his silence. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. So much to share with you tonight. Pulitzer Prize winner Ron Suskind and Tim Conway are both straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show or if you have a question, drop us an email at worldover@EWTN.com, and we are on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Let's get started. My guest was an aide to 3 presidents, author of the new book, The Greatest Comeback. Please welcome back to the program, Patrick J. Buchanan.
How are you, Raymond?
Great to see you again.
Good to see you, my friend.
Now, let's talk about this.
Sure.
The GOP in 1965 is faced with a 2-time loser in Richard Nixon. Mm-hmm. This guy just lost in a huge way. Mm-hmm. You see similarities between his situation, where the GOP is now. What's the answer? What's the lesson?
Well, the Republican Party in 1965 had lost 2 straight national elections. The last one, a complete disaster, 25 points, 44 states. Nixon himself was a loser. There are a number of things that are part of the answer. The first one is Nixon went out in 1966 and campaigned, first in 1964. Mm-hmm. He went out and fought and bled for Barry Goldwater in the full knowledge that the party was going down to disastrous defeat to save as many as he could. And he was rewarded with thanks and gratitude from an awful lot of conservatives. 66, he went out and did the same thing, predicted he's going to pick up 40 states at Lyndon Johnson's expense, got 47 states. So that, I think, the idea of loyalty and fighting for the party, which were natural to him, turned out to be also advantageous to him.
Because he even described himself as a progressive conservative, Pat. He was hardly Barry Goldwater or Ronald Reagan material.
Right. When I went up and had my meeting with him for 3 hours and was hired, he looked at me and said, "You're conservative. You're not as conservative as Bill Buckley, are you?" I said, "I have great respect for Bill Buckley."
Oh, boy. Look at that. The Buchanan dodge right from the beginning.
That was a problem area in the interview I did.
How did you come to meet him? How did you first meet?
I met him in St. Louis. The first time I met him, I was about 14 years old at the Burning Tree Country Club.
Oh, my.
Sitting on the caddy log out there late in the afternoon when the plaid golf bag of the Vice President of the United States comes out. And the assistant pro looks over at me and my friend Pete Cook, and he's really wary. These amateur caddies are there. And he brought us, and I went around 18 holes with Richard Milhouse Nixon at Burning Tree when I was about 14 or 15. About 10 years later, I'm in St. Louis, editorial writer. I got myself invited to a cocktail party. I wanted to meet him. Went up to him in the kitchen and said, "If you're going to run in 1968, I'd like to get aboard early." 2 weeks later, I was in his office in New York for a 3-hour interview.
Wow. There is something in the book, there's a moment where you say, you have these memos that go back and forth.
Right.
And what I love about the book is, I've read a lot about Richard Nixon, read a number of biographies, read all of his memoirs. I had never seen these memos. Where did these memos come from, Pat?
They came deep in my basement. Look,
Rich, you got your own National Archive in there.
I've had them in there for years and years, have not seen them for years and years, going into them. But what they were was, the way I dealt with Nixon is, he was in the next office, and rather than go in and ask, I would type out a memo, and this, and I'd make a lot of mistakes, as you can see in the memos, typing and things, right? And then I'd put them into a pile and give them to him, drop them in his briefcase. He'd take them home, and he'd come back and write notes the next day, excellent analysis, get in touch with him. No, this guy's a such and such,
Colorful memos.
Stay away from him and everything. Yeah. But we had a terrific communication. And then I spent about 2, 3, 4 hours a day sitting across from him because he was tremendously intellectually curious. He would come in and he said, okay, now tell me why you conservatives believe this. And we'd argue something back and forth, and he would come back. You know, once or twice I came out agreeing with his original position, and he was agreeing with mine, you know, but he was tremendously, it's politics, personality, issues, foreign policy especially, intellectually alive, aware. And I think, you know, dreaming that after all these defeats, there was still a path down that sideline to the goal line.
What you realize when you read this is the great influence that you had on him. I mean, his disposition was normally to the moderate and sort of to the left. I mean, this is the guy who founded the EPA and the National Endowment for the Arts.
He was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I said, we got to get rid of that one, you know.
So you were trying to make him ready for prime time in the Republican Party.
I was the first Goldwater conservative, you know, the post-war conservative movement that arose with National Review, Goldwater movement, and the rest of it. The first one, I think, in his entourage. All of the folks previously with Nixon and his staff in '60 really were down on the right wing because they had gutted Nixon in California, the governor's race, disliked the Goldwater people and everything. But I was there, and I was, you know, far, far more conservative than Nixon was, but he was very interested in what you had to say. And I said, look, the thing we got to do, Raymond, is, I said, if we can marry the Goldwater right to the Nixon center of the party, there's nobody on the left that can beat us for the nomination. We can crowd them out. And then we can move and get those Northern Catholics who are socially conservative, like my family, the guys I went to school with, and the Southern Protestants who are breaking now because they don't like the liberalism of the Democratic Party, but are currently with Wallace. And we can build a great coalition to defeat FDR.
Is there a lesson here for the political parties as they exist today, for both the Democratic and the Republican parties? The Republican Party, let's face it right now, though they have majorities here in the House and they're creeping up in the Senate, nationally, it seems to be very disunified.
It's hard to see the president. I mean, I could see back then a presidential coalition that could defeat the Democratic coalition of FDR for years. And Kevin Phillips was writing his book then about that very idea, '68, and he came aboard. And what did I say? I wrote Nixon a memo. I said, there is an awesome creature out here in my office. I mean, he was so brilliant. He was so brilliant that he got it and others got it. But today, you know, I can't see it, Raymond. I mean, there's 18 states that have gone Democratic 6 straight times, and they're getting more Democratic, and the demography is moving against us because Hispanic population is growing, Asian population is growing, African and population growing. They go between 70 and 90% Democratic in every presidential elections, and they are growing. And the European American population is gradually shrinking in size. It's moving towards 60% of the population and 70% of the electorate.
Tell me, as you look at the candidates that are out there, Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Paul Ryan and Rick Santorum. And
can you stand the excitement?
I'm glad you said that, Pat.
Shouldn't have said that. No, look, there's a lot of them. I know Rand Paul, and he's got a lot of qualities. I admire his courage in standing up on the war issue.
Can any of them beat Hillary Clinton?
At this point, I don't think so. I think what we need, and here's one thing that Nixon had going for him. It was luck in a sense, but he was coming back at the very point the Democratic Party, the great coalition, twice as large as the Republican Party, was falling apart. George Wallace was ripping off not only the South, but all these populist Catholic conservatives in the North. They loved that message he was giving them, you know. There's not a dime's worth of difference between the two parties. Then you had the left, Bobby Kennedy, Eugene McCarthy, George McGovern, moving anti-war, savaging Johnson, you know, appealing to the kids who were yelling, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And eventually, you know, the Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is going to win. And so all those were inside the Democratic Party, and they were all pulling apart. And that's what gave us the opportunity to seize fractions, big fractions of that party on the center right.
He tells you something very early on. In 1966, he said, before you can even think about 68, running in 68, we have to restore the party base.
Exactly.
Do you see that message needing to resonate now?
I think needing it, I think that's exactly right. But look where the base was in 1965. When I talked to him in that kitchen, that's exactly what he said. Republicans had 140 House seats, the Democrats 295. We had 32 senators, they had 68. I think we had 17 governors, about 1/3 of the governors. And so that base was shrunken, but the base Republicans have got today is much larger, 90 more seats in the House. But you look at the future, and you don't see that bright light over the horizon. It looks like it may be twilight for the GOP.
This is the man who wrote Where the Right Went Wrong, the suicide of a superpower. So much
Death of the West, all that very positive work.
Yeah, all those positive, uplifting books. But everything you write about in those books has largely come to pass. And I mean, we'll get into some of that in a moment. Before I leave Nixon, we have to ask, where did this idea come of the forgotten American, the great silent majority, as he would later
That came
describe
out,
them?
I mean, the 60s, what happened, the 60s you had soaring crimes, you had urban riots, you had anarchy by the overprivileged on the campuses, and all in denunciations and demonstrations everywhere. And Nixon kept saying, look, there's people out there, hardworking people, tax-paying folks who love this country, and we use forgotten Americans and quiet Americans and other phrases. And in one memo I mentioned twice the phrase silent majority, and it's double underlined by Richard Nixon. And it would pop up in 1969 in that great speech, basically that made his presidency, the great silent majority to stand up behind me. Nixon soared to 68% approval. You know, and this was not a charismatic
Did you write
man.
that speech?
Nixon wrote that speech entirely by himself. Nobody helped him on it. But I will say I sent him memos and saying, we're at a fateful point in the presidency. Either we're going to run the country or this crowd out in the street's going to run it. And I think you've got to go on national television, deliver a speech. The next day, Nixon said there'll be a speech on November 3rd.
My goodness. Now look, like Goldwater, you doubled down when you ran for president twice. You didn't tack to the left a bit and try to, it seems you didn't play the coalitions quite the way that
That isn't the way you
Nixon
overthrow a president of the United States. Look, George H.W. Bush was at 90% six months before I challenged him.
Right.
What am I going to go in and say, actually, I agree with President Bush on a number of issues, but I'm a more attractive fellow?
You certainly give a better speech.
You had to come on. That whole idea in 1992 was to go and run a campaign, exciting campaign, and get all these young people out, and hope, frankly, that Bush would say what Lyndon Johnson did. I've served one term, and I don't think I'm going to run.
I've had enough.
And then you'd be running to daylight.
I want to talk about something else.
Didn't work.
Well, you tried twice though, and you gave it your all. Nixon and Reagan, you reveal in the book, had an alliance. I've never seen this anywhere. Where did this come from?
Well, it came out of things in my files and letters and things. And a friend of mine brought some letters that he had gotten out of the Nixon archives, and they seemed to be simply letters between Reagan and Nixon, you know. But if you put them all together with the files I had, it looked to me like a deal had been cut at Bohemian Grove in 1967, where Nixon spoke and Reagan was. You know, that's where all the Republican bulls get together.
Yeah.
And the deal was that Nixon would get the first crack at the liberals in the Republican Party, the Rockefeller-Romney wing. And if he hadn't demolished them by Wisconsin, which was the second primary, Reagan would be free to come in and try to grab the nomination. Because the letters were saying, Reagan, Dick, as you know, some of my guys got a little bit out of hand and trying to push me forward, and I had to put them down and things. I understand, Ron, you know, and all that. So, and there was a column by De Toledano which said the deal had been cut, and I sent it into Nixon, and it came back with Nixon's usual check mark. But I had marked that passage where it said just such a deal had been cut, and the very fact that he didn't comment on it told me that he had been the guy behind De Toledano's column. He had been the source. Because De Toledano had been with him ever since the Hiss case.
Interesting. Interesting. What's the compare those two? You worked for both of these men very closely.
Right.
Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. I hope you're going to write the book about the Reagan years as well.
Right.
Is that coming?
Well,
I know you promised here part two.
I had about nine years with Nixon and 2 with Reagan in the White House. But this, of course, only covers 3 years. But I would hope to write the sequel to this, and in that deal with the Reagan years as well, the connections between Reagan and Nixon, my days and hours at Reykjavik and some of those other occasions. Yeah.
Those are great stories. Final question: when you look at everything that's happened since your time with Richard Nixon, what do you regret most about that period, and what do you remember most fondly?
Well, what I regret most is certainly the Watergate, which brought down President Nixon and destroyed a tremendously successful presidency. But beyond that, it was what happened to the folks in Saigon and the folks in Cambodia. When Nixon's presidency was broken and the North Vietnamese overran the South. What did you get? A million dead in Cambodia, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million in the South China Sea, boat people. And the loss of the war. America, I mean, the United States Army didn't lose that war, but America lost that war 2 years, about 8 months after he left, or 10 months after he left office. That's the worst. But one of the best are the times with at Reykjavik with Ronald Reagan, which was, you thought you're almost in a movie, getting up from the table and walking out, and it was terrific. And there were great times with Richard Milhouse Nixon, and one of them, of course, was that '66 campaign where we bested Lyndon Baines Johnson. Let me tell you a quick anecdote.
Okay.
After the election in '68, we all went to the White House. The staff of Johnson met with the new staff of Nixon, and we were all introduced to the president. We all walked down the line. And I'd been working on Johnson's case for 3 years with Nixon. So we go up and we shake hands with him. And Lyndon, I said, "How are you, Mr. President? I'm Pat Buchanan." And he looked down at me and said, "I know who you are."
That was it. Well, that was like a badge of honor, right?
Let me out of here.
Pat Buchanan, thank you for being here.
Take it easy.
Hope to see you again soon.
Right.
Pat's latest book, The Greatest Comeback, How Richard Nixon Rose from Defeat to Create the New Majority, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. When we return, Emmy Award-winning comic legend Tim Conway joins me in an exclusive interview and tells us what's so funny. Mrs. Huygens, don't go anywhere. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. He is a true show business legend. He's been making us laugh for over 50 years. From his start on the Gary Moore Show to McHale's Navy to his 11-year stint on the Carol Burnett Show. My next guest is a national treasure. He returned to The World Over earlier this year to talk about his work, his faith, and his terrific memoir, What's So Funny? My Hilarious Life. And it certainly was when I sat down with Tim Conway at his home in Los Angeles. Take a look. Now, well, this story started in Chagrin Falls, Ohio.
Yes.
I want to start there, and I want you to share with us, who were your comedic influences? Who were you watching or listening to, more importantly, at that time?
I think it was the guys who named our town Chagrin,
Chagrin?
because that means disappointment in Indian or whatever. And so Chagrin Falls, Disappointing Falls, and it was, because it was only about 4 feet high and the water would trickle over it. So you'd go down to Disappointing Falls to get married and all of that.
And just to feel bad about it.
Yeah. No, it was a great hometown. It was like a Tom Sawyer village, and I was very happy there. Much happier than I am here, because you fellas have rearranged all our furniture for us.
The whole domicile,
right.
For which I apologize.
Don't worry about it.
Now, you were doing a show in the late 50s and early 60s on Cleveland television.
Yes.
How did you get into performing?
I had nothing else to do, and so I went down to a television station in Cleveland, and I said, you know, I have an idea for a show. And Ernie Anderson will be the talent, a local guy who was very funny, at least I thought so, and I would be the director. Now, I had never directed, and he had very questionable talent. So we went on in the morning. Our first review said, "You want to see Stink? Tune in to 8 o'clock."
Well, that's a great, what a tagline.
It stayed on quite some time, almost a year, because, or 14 weeks or whatever they were giving us, because it was so bad. And
it couldn't have been too bad. Rosemary, who was,
Yes.
you know, a big star at the time,
Right.
she, I guess, blew into Cleveland doing something, saw you, and recommended you to Steve Allen?
Rosemary from the Dick Van Dyke Show was happening coming through Cleveland, promoting the Dick Van Dyke Show, and I said, "You want to see something? What we're doing here?" And she said, "Gee, that's awful." And I said, "Yes, we have reviews to prove that." So she said, "Let me take this to Steve, because I think it's something that Steve would," because Don Knotts, Louis Nye, Tom Poston at the time were on his show, and he likes unusual talent. And she said, "You are certainly unusual." So I came out here. Steve did his show, and the next thing I know, I was a regular on the show.
You end up, though, in McHale's Navy with Ernie Borgnine.
Yes.
What was that like? I mean, suddenly you went from really doing sketch television to a scripted show. Tough transition?
It was wonderful. Ernie was, for a star as big as he had just come off From Here to Eternity, and I mean, having these idiots running around, you know, "Oh, hi, Skip." Ernie was the kind of a volatile guy, and he would punch people from time to time. Fortunately, not me.
I was going to ask, were you ever on the receiving end?
No.
Okay.
I always liked Ernie.
Your mother wasn't so sure, though. Even when you were, I mean, this was a big deal. You're on McHale's Navy. The show was running. Your mother calls you and says,
Jim Shutt is who he owned the hardware in town.
In Chagrin Falls.
Yeah. And she said, he's hiring another guy, and you know Jim pretty well, so I think you could get that job. So why don't you come home and work in the hardware? I said, "Have you been watching television for the last couple of years?" And she said, "Yeah, but that crap's not going to go." So I said, "Well, maybe you're right."
So you did for a moment think about the
Yes.
selling the nails and the hammers.
Oh, yeah. I could still be there. Yeah. You want a size 16 nut? Here they go.
Did you ever think decades later, before I leave McHale's Navy, decades later, that you and Ernest Borgnine would be reunited doing SpongeBob SquarePants, which my children now know you from?
Well, I had no idea what we were doing. You know, you go in and you read, and they said, "You do SpongeBob," and yeah, okay. Well, the next thing I know, people are saying, "Well, we heard you on
You're a
that
Barnacle
show."
Boy.
Yeah, you're a Barnacle Boy. And yeah, it was very popular. And we did very well with that.
At some point in your book, which is screamingly funny, we haven't talked about the book yet, which is why I'm here.
I haven't read it either.
You have, well, the Cliff Notes are coming, so or you can read the review in the New York Times, which is very good.
Oh, really?
Yes. Let's talk about the chapter in this book which you call Heaven. And that is where you recount your days on the Carol Burnett Show.
Yes.
Why do you call the chapter Heaven?
Well, it was heaven. After working with Ernie Borgnine and 6 other guys for a long time, once in a while you'd see a nurse on the show, but that was it for females. So it
War
was
as hell.
Yeah, right. It was like going overseas.
What was it about that group of people and that time that made the Carol Burnett Show work?
Well, we were all alcoholics,
Oh,
so
that's a
that
good start.
Gave us certain relaxation to the show. I guess it was the rhythm of the show, and Harvey and I were the best of friends, and Carol is the most generous person you can imagine, and so we never had any problems with a star going, "I'll say that," and she was always willing to share the show, and I think that's what made it so good. I didn't necessarily want to do the show, but she said, you know, you better come in and
Or she was going to recall the loan.
Yeah.
That's what. Tell me about there's some classic characters we have to revisit. Mr. Tudball, where did he originate? I was stunned to learn the source of his particular accent while reading the book. Explain that to people.
Well, my godparents were Romanian, and I never understood either one of them. And when they came over, they talked like this. So I would sit there and go, and my dad would be, do you know what they're saying? No. So they would say, well, we come out the next Sunday, and we sit around here and we just chat. And so I said, okay, we'll see you next Sunday. So that rhythm of what they were talking like, I kind of put into Tudball. And I was the boss of Mrs. Wiggins, who had a rather large rump.
I noticed that.
Oh.
We're in luck. It's the mating season. What's the matter with you, beauty?
I don't know. I'm just so tired. It's all this Christmas hubbub, you know?
Christmas? I got the real Walter Cronkite for you, kid. Christmas isn't for the 9 months yet.
Oh, I know that. No, it's just that I like to do all of my shopping now so that I won't be tired then.
That makes a lot of sense. That's like eating a jar of jelly in case somebody asks you to the peanut butter prom.
Was that your creation, or was that sketch written and then, I mean, obviously the character was your creation. Did you write the sketch or no?
The rump was my
The rump was your contribution. I knew
contribution. I wrote, I guess, a lot of them, but you know, once you get writers and they understand what you're doing, they write it. So towards the end of the 33 shows, they got onto it and they started writing stuff for me, which I would do around the house.
Oh,
here.
that's
yeah.
good. So are those the you're releasing those next season on DVD?
Yeah, they are on
the extras, director's
CDs,
cut.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk for a second about this classic elephant story sketch. Okay. If there's one sketch that makes my children cry, my wife and I cry, my parents cry, it is that. In fact, we just watched it not long ago. That was part of my prep for this interview.
Oh, really?
Yes, we rewatched that moment. Where did that come from? Was that a rehearsal?
No, that was the show that we were taping.
Which obviously they had never seen before.
Joe Hamilton, who was the producer of the show at the time, came out and he said, we're a little long on this show. So when Carol asks you a question, the question to which was the answer, elephant, just say elephant and get off.
I was at this freak show one time and I saw these Siamese elephants. There's a joint at the end of their trunks like that. And this trainer make them stand up on their back feet like that, and it had their trunk stretched like that. Then this little monkey had come out. Walk out there and dance the merengue right out there. Kind of felt sorry for them. They couldn't go like the other elephants when they go. All they could do is just blow and go, Norkin.
It went on about, I would say, 4 or 5 minutes, and I could see the directors in the booth in the back going, oh, how are we going to cut this up? But that was the fun of the show. And Carol was just as hysterical because she knew that they were in trouble too. So
no, it is a classic.
Yeah.
A classic moment. What was it like? You've had such amazing partnerships over the years. What was it like working with Harvey Korman? What was it about his particular straight man to your wacky, uncontrollable self that made those scenes crackle and work?
Well, Harvey was probably the most intelligent person I have ever met. I mean, he knew everything about everything, but the man could not tie his own shoes. So I could put him on rather easily. And I would tell him things that had no way of being true, and he would buy them. So whenever I had the opportunity, I would stab him. And
Usually when a camera was rolling.
oh yes.
Come on! I'm trying to get on stage.
Seems to me, as I watch the Carol Burnett show, as I watch even your films, beneath all of this, there is that great sweet affection. You could tell these people really did care for each other and do.
Yeah.
Tell me about your relationship with Don Knotts, and was that part of it? Were you all personal friends?
Well, Don, he is a great work with, and you know, and we were shooting in Atlanta one time, and we were in a room, and with all the lights, I mean, it was 180 in there, you know. And Don was, you know, it's kind of warm in here. Can we open the window or something or no? So I said, you know, he's uncomfortable. Can we? No, we can't do that. So finally, Don said, he got up and he got very angry because he was kept in this room. And he said, you know, he knows you're nine. And everybody said, what'd he say? I said, sorry.
So he was the character we saw on screen.
Character, yeah.
Let's shift gears for a moment and talk
Yeah.
about one of your other great creations, which is Dorf.
Uh-huh.
Where did Dorf come from?
I was doing a golf tape, and I said, you know, they're all the same, you know, you show guys keep your elbow and all that. I said, let's make this guy short. So we dug a hole in the ground, and I put the shoes on my knees, and I was standing in there doing this thing with the Dorf. And a dog came out from the woods and took a leak on me. And I'm going, gee, I guess he thought I was a fire hydrant or something. And
There you are.
Well, you have to take the bad with the good.
Sold millions of copies, those DVDs.
Yes.
Millions
yes.
of them. And you, I mean,
Well,
you did.
I bought them all.
Well, I do. I know
Yeah.
you and your family. I saw the boxes as I came in. But race car. Dorf did everything. Hunting.
Oh, yes.
I mean, there were iterations of this, and I mean, it really caught on. Did you ever imagine when you did this one little character that it would?
I never really imagined anything when I'm doing something. You know, it just sometimes takes off. I have a lot of unsuccessful things too. Yeah, but for the most part, everything is kind of either made a small bang or a pop.
There's something I need to talk about that I
Yes.
learned reading the book. I knew that you were a convert to the Catholic faith.
Yes,
What I didn't realize was
I was
this.
a priest.
That's the one I didn't realize.
Yes.
and a contender for the Pope in the last election, which I didn't know.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was very interesting, on the write-in ballot. Let's talk about how you had this moment in high school, this accident, where you were playing football, were hit in the spine, and years later, you're going into back spasms, and you attribute this sort of being a wake-up call for your faith. Tell us about that story.
I went to a doctor. Well, first of all, after I got that bang, I played football the next weekend with a broken back, and I didn't know it. And the doctor said, you know, you've got to be very careful now. You have a cracked vertebrae, and until this thing heals or comes back together, you have to be very careful. So I didn't, of course. And years later, a doctor was examining me for something else, and he said, you know, this could be a result of your broken back. And he said, what back broken? He said, well, you evidently cracked a vertebrae a long time ago. And he said, you could have been, first of all, paralyzed for the rest of your life. I had always been rather religious, and I got in touch with the man upstairs who turned out to be Jonathan Winters.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah. And got in touch with the man upstairs and said, you know, thank you very much. And I became a Catholic and have been a very strict, I don't go around going, you know, you should, and I would, because that doesn't mean anything.
No, you live it, but you see it through your work.
Yes.
There's a gentility and a kind of
well, I've
sweetness
never
in your work.
sworn in front of an audience. I've never done, well, I've taken off my clothes, but
But you put other clothes on.
Yeah, I can't take that. So, yeah, I've tried to remain something that if people come to see the show that they could enjoy with the children. And
Tim, why did you convert? You were raised Romanian Orthodox, baptized. That baptism story is hilarious, by the way, which you might want to recount.
I was being baptized, and I guess it was about 3 or 4 months old. And they put you on a little crib and down close to the floor, and they put the baby there, and you all walk around with some kind of holy rag or something, all holding on to it and saying prayers. And my parents were walking around with that, and I happened to fall off this thing and rolled under the table. And so when they all looked up, I'm gone. My dad said, he has risen. And the priest said, no, he has fallen. So, yeah, oh, here he is. They found me, put me back on.
Kind of an early slapstick. You're already doing pratfalls right at the
baptism. My dad was
baptism.
doing comedy, I guess.
Yeah. Why did you convert to Catholicism?
I liked the structure of it. It was much stricter than most other religions. You just got dressed on Sunday and went to church, and that was it. But Catholics, you got a lot of crosses hanging around your neck and rings and things of that nature. And so it was something I was comfortable with.
Tell me about your hidden talent, which we learn about in this book, which is you are a tailor. And in a moment, we're going to show people just how accomplished you are.
Yes.
Where did this come from?
My mother was a seamstress, and sitting that long watching her sew, I kind of picked it up, and I would make clothes. You couldn't wear them out in public.
As I read this book, it is such a sunny, fun romp, really, through your life. There are great stories here, also a lot of insight into your personal life, your family, but it is a sunny portrait. What is the saddest moment in Tim Conway's life?
Wow,
aside from this interview. Please.
Well, this is pretty sad.
Yeah. I know it.
I think like when my dog died, you know, those are sad moments. But no, my parents never smacked me or anything like that because I was a perfect child.
Well, that's what it is, sure.
Yeah. My mother actually said to my dad one time, he's done this, and she listed a whole bunch of things, and so my dad said, come here. So he went into my bedroom, and he took off his belt, and I thought, oh boy.
Oh, here it comes.
So he started whacking the bed, and he said, you know, So I'm going, and my mother came out and said, well, you know, no, don't do that anymore. I said, I know. I won't.
So that's as bad as it got in the Conway
that's
household.
as bad as it got, yeah.
That's not too bad. And it's been an amazing story. It's an amazing book. And what a life. What is the lesson that people should draw from Tim Conway's life and work?
Well, you're only here once, and you've got to enjoy it. I know it's tough at times because outside elements do make it rather restrictive, money and things of that nature, but enjoy it while you're here. It's such a pleasure to be involved with you.
Okay.
And this whole crew.
Invading your
Yeah.
home. I know.
Yeah,
This is
right.
probably in fact, you could write another book just about this experience, and I hope
Yes.
you will. Tim Conway, you are a constant joy to so many.
There's no question about it.
That's true. Certainly to our family and to so many others. So I thank you for that and for the interview.
Oh, thank you.
He's too much. Now, during that interview, there was a little piece of video I want to share with you. Tim Conway referenced that he is a tailor. I want to show you how he's used that skill in the room where we shot the interview. Take a look. Now, is this your normal attire when in this room?
Yes, I come down here and relax. I have a bedspread made out of this same material, so I'm comfortable wherever it's on.
He is a stitch. What's So Funny? My Hilarious Life by Tim Conway is available at bookstores everywhere and at all the online retailers. When we return, our Unseen Hero segment, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author Ron Suskind joins us to discuss his son's autism and the surprising key that unlocked his voice. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. About 2 million people are diagnosed with autism in the U.S. alone. 500,000 are children, 1 in 54 are boys. My next guest has very personal experience with autism. At 3 years of age, his perfectly normal son, Owen, suddenly stopped speaking. The boy couldn't sleep or eat. Owen's only relief from his withdrawal from life were the animated Disney films he watched with his brother. Tonight, our Unseen Hero segment features Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and author of the new book, Life Animated, a story of sidekicks, heroes, and autism. Ron Suskind joined me recently via satellite to discuss this inspiring memoir, his family's struggle with autism, and the power of affinity therapy. Here's my interview with Ron Suskind. Ron, you and your wife noticed when Owen was about 3 years old, he just stopped communicating. What did you see? What did you think at that moment?
Well, you know, we were just the typical happy family moving forward. 2 boys. My older son is 5, Owen. At that point was just shy of 3. And, you know, first we didn't notice and wondered. We didn't know what to think. You know, he stopped speaking. He wouldn't make eye contact. He was very unhappy. And it was a mystery, like there'd been a kidnapping.
Wow.
You know, I said to my wife, kids don't grow backwards. What could this be? And then a few months later, we heard the word autism for the first time. And then later, even after that, we were told this is kind of called regressive autism.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Where just shy of 3 years old, somewhere between 1.5 years and 3, the kids regress, meaning they go backwards and lose speech. He lost all speech, so he couldn't talk after that.
And the doctors at this point, they were at a bit of a loss. He is watching Disney films obsessively. And the doctors caution you about indulging what they called his obsessions or his fixations. What did you think?
That's right. That's right. That's the thinking at that point, and has been for many decades, that these affinities, his obsessions, are not healthy. that many kids on the autism spectrum, which is now about 3 million folks in the United States and 70 million worldwide, and mind you, it's 1 out of 42 boys, according to the Centers for Disease Control just this spring. That's 2.5% of the male population of the United States. Extraordinary. Wow. The view is that these passions, these obsessions, are more prison than pathway, that kids get involved in this. It's like a wheel in the ditch. They can't get out, and you should try to wean them off of it or cut it off. And we got that advice for many years from very fine specialists who we had great admiration for and still do. But what we found is when he watched his Disney favorites, which he loved before the onset of the autism at about 2.5, he just seemed contented. The only place he seemed happy and contented was there. And then he was speaking in bits of gibberish after about a year, you know, just like baby talk. And at one point he was saying, "Juicervos, juicervos." And then we were watching one day The Little Mermaid, all of us, the two of us together, his older brother. And all of a sudden he was rewinding the part where Ariel, the protagonist from that movie, loses her voice, has to trade her voice to become human. And the sea witch says, "Just your voice." He rewinds again. After a minute, my wife says, he's not saying juice, he's saying just. I grab Owen, I say, "Just your voice." He says, "Juicervos, juicervos." And at that moment, we saw something that has turned into a new way of looking at autism and maybe how to treat autism too. It's called affinity therapy. We called it Disney therapy when Owen was young. We had to give it some kind of name. And now it's changing the way I think folks see this condition.
And Ron, explain to people what you believe your son took from the repeated viewing of these Disney movies, and why these Disney films. It was basically a handful of them. Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, sort of the hand-drawn 90s cartoons.
Yeah, and he went back to Dumbo and, you know, Snow White and all the rest. The hand-drawn seemed to have more of a hold on him. What we found is that, and this is something we're hearing from many parents, is that these hand-drawn animated features especially that are emotionally rich have a particular hold on this community. Because the exaggerated expressions of the characters and the scenes that you can understand even with the sound off, as Walt Disney way back told his animators, that's what he wanted, allow a kind of safe place where these kids can rewind again and again and draw deeper and deeper meaning from these iconic stories, frankly, stories that go back thousands of years that human beings have always used to make their way in the world. Well, Owen and many kids like them have had to live on a diet of what they can see and hear, these movies rewound over and over again, very exclusively or in great concentrations, and they've drawn meaning from them. So as Owen says, he had to live in a diet of myth, fable, and legend for so much of his life. But what it built in him was an acuity, an understanding of the power of story in shaping our lives. And that's something all human beings know. It's just this extreme case of Owen and so many kids like him are teaching us this powerful lesson now.
Ron, was it the moral clarity of these stories? I mean, there is sort of a strong through line in all these Disney classics.
Yeah, there's no doubt that was part of the hold. And Owen can talk about that now. He's a little like Temple Grandin, that well-known autistic lady. Owen can describe what it felt like now. He's 23. But yeah, that was a big part of it. It was not just the emotional richness, but it was the moral precept, the moral prescription and lessons in these movies that he held tight to.
And it really helped him find his voice.
As he learned them early on. Exactly. And what's interesting about it is as he walked out into the world as a teenager, he began to test these in the world of shades of gray, of human interaction. Does love last forever? How does one end up being true to oneself? Is the nature of friendship lasting? You know, what does it mean to see beauty within? And that's what gave him such powerful moral clarity. And it was helpful also with his religious life. We're Jewish, and Owen, you could feel the spiritual energy and the moral energy coming from these movies as something that enlightened and energized him at his bar mitzvah when he gives his bar mitzvah speech in the book, which is quite moving.
Beautiful. No, it's beautiful. And I love this line he wrote where he said, "I'm the protector of the sidekicks and no sidekick gets left behind. Tell me what importance that had in your life, in his life, and your understanding of where he was and how he saw himself in the family.
Well, it's fascinating. That's when he got his first real whack. He was thrown out of a school for autistic spectrum kids and learning disabled kids. It was a stretch for him, it was difficult, but it was really his home. He'd been there for 5 years, and of course these are kids who have trouble with change. He's about 11 years old. He doesn't have enough speech to really describe how he feels. He goes down to the basement of our house, and this is the place, mind you, where we play out the movies. Once we realized a few years before that if you threw him a line, he'd throw you back the next line, we started to become animated characters. We became all of the key characters in all the movies. That's how we conversed with him. We spoke in Disney dialogue. He goes to the basement, and after a while we see he's drawing furiously, and he's drawing sidekicks, no heroes, and he becomes an expert on the sidekicks. He doesn't feel now like a hero himself. He feels like a sidekick. A sidekick helps the hero fulfill his destiny, but not for him. And at the end of a book, a sketch book with 100 sidekicks, no heroes, he writes two things. I am the protector of the sidekicks. And finally he writes, no sidekick gets left behind. But my wife is Catholic, and she says, well, that's out of either the New or the Old Testament. That is a powerful philosophical position, the notion that we really are all sidekicks deep down. And the key is no sidekick will be left behind. That became his view of his place in the world.
I love that he goes on to college. He's now dating. He starts a Disney club at college. Tell me about that. Tell me how Owen's doing now.
He's doing great. So he just graduated from this college program after 3 years.
Wow.
He started Disney Club as soon as he gets there. And at that point, I'm at Harvard. I'm the writer in residence at the Kennedy School. We drive from Harvard Square out to Cape Cod, where his school is, and there's a room full of Owens. There's 12 kids just like him. And they were not raised, these kids, under the intense affinity therapy method that we had developed. But it's interesting, many of them, they had the same passion Owen did. They said everything can be found in these iconic myths and narratives. And we basically said to these kids, you're not crazy, you're right. And as we did, we opened it up, and it was like a dam break. They just opened up emotionally, spiritually, and began to talk about the characters that spoke to them. One of the kids in the first meeting, I said, what character is the character that you've embraced? And he says, this is a kid with very little speech, mind you. He says, Pinocchio. And I said, why? He says, because, you know, I feel like a wooden boy, and I've always dreamed of feeling what real boys feel. And I was born with wooden eyes. That's a powerful personal insight that, frankly, a typical 18-year-old would have trouble mustering.
Right.
And that's the way it worked. And his girlfriend in Disney Club, he's been going out for 2 years with her, Emily. She's a Dumbo girl, and she'll explain to you why. She embraced Dumbo. Many of the kids who have no speech, she didn't have speech when she was small, embraced non-speaking characters, Dumbo, Pluto, who express all emotions without words. Emily will tell you, she says, well, why Dumbo? Because the thing that made him an outcast, those big ears, well, that's something I understand, she said, in my life. But what Dumbo learned, I learned too. So the thing that makes you different, well, it allows you to soar. And that's, again, a powerful notion of how the things that distinguish us are often our greatest gifts, even if the one-size-fits-all models that we often use to judge people and value them or not value them is something that we often fall into in our lives.
It really gave them a lexicon of language to communicate, a way in which, and it seems to me, Ron, and we only have a minute, I've been reading this book, Writing from the Right Side of the Brain, where you're engaging a different side of the brain, the more creative side. Is that what you think they're tapping into through these Disney classics?
There's no doubt, and what we have found, and this is the thing that's being studied at NIH, at Yale, at MIT, all part of this new explosion of affinity therapy, is that the fact is that some of the traditional ways we show ability or cognition, it just doesn't work for these kids. But it's just like high school science. The energy goes somewhere if a pathway is blocked. They have special abilities in the areas of their affinity.
Thank
and that's
you,
what
Ron.
we're now studying, and we're using that to find ways that they could pull themselves forward on their own, using these special gifts, and almost every kid's got them. The question is, where is that special gift? And we're right now on a kind of national mission, and even international. That's what I spoke about at the United Nations.
Great.
To find those gifts so that these kids can carry forward their own lives powerfully, and often with great passion and spiritual energy, which I think is what you're seeing in the book.
Life Animated, A Story of Sidekicks, Heroes, and Autism by Ron Suskind is available at bookstores everywhere and online. And you can find out more about Ron's Autism Affinities Project by visiting lifeanimated.net. Well, that is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, and you can sign up there for my free e-blast. I'll send you exclusive content and the latest news. Go to the center of the webpage at RaymondArroyo.com. Stay tuned next week for my exclusive interview with Cardinal Raymond Burke. We'll discuss the Synod on the Family and the controversy surrounding it. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.